Gregg shorthand is a form of stenography that was invented by John Robert Gregg in 1888. Like cursive longhand, it is completely based on elliptical figures and lines that bisect them. Gregg shorthand is the most popular form of pen stenography in the United States. Its Spanish adaptation is fairly popular in Latin America. With the invention of dictation machines, shorthand machines, and the practice of executives writing their own letters on their personal computers, the use of shorthand has gradually declined in the business and reporting world. However, Gregg shorthand is still in use today. There is a reasonable possibility that John Robert Gregg structured his shorthand on the mnemonic major system based on the previous work of Pierre Hérigone and others following the publication of the anti-absurd or Phrenotypic English Pronouncing and Orthographical Dictionary by Major Beniowski in 1845. Several versions of this system were published. Pre-anniversary includes the first 5 editions, the first one published in 2 small paper-covered pamphlets in 1888, the second published in 1893, the third in book form in 1897, the fourth in 1902, and the fifth in 1916. Anniversary, a revised and simplified form published in 1929, was so called because it was to be published on the 40th anniversary of the system, but there was some delay in publication. In 1949, Simplified was created, in which many of the principles and memorized forms were removed or simplified due to findings of studies by the publishers and suggestions of many shorthand teachers. Diamond Jubilee was published in 1963, which simplified the simplified version. Series 90 was published in 1978, which simplified it further. The last version was Centennial, published in 1988, with several similarities to the Diamond Jubilee system earlier. Besides these main editions, which were designed for the dictation speeds expected of any shorthand system of the time, a number of simpler, personal use editions were published from 1924 to 1968. These included Greekhand in 1935, and Nothand in 1960 and 1968. Gregg is often contrasted to Pitman shorthand, as the two share huge predominance over other English shorthand systems. Pitman uses line thickness and position to discriminate between two similar sounds, but Gregg shorthand uses the same thickness throughout and discriminates between similar sounds by the length of the stroke. John Robert Gregg was originally a teacher of a duployan shorthand adaptation to English. However, he found the angular outlines of duployan-based systems to be detrimental to speed. Gregg shorthand features cursive strokes which can be naturally blended without obtuse angles. In addition, because the symbols of Gregg shorthand are developed especially for English rather than adapted from a French system, they are a better fit for the language. Writing. Gregg shorthand is a system of phonography, or a phonetic writing system, which means it records the sounds of the speaker, not the English spelling. It uses the F stroke for the sound in funnel, telephone, and laugh. All silent letters are omitted. The image on the right shows the strokes of Gregg shorthand simplified. The system is written from left to right and the letters are joined. Sh, ch, and j are written downward, while t and d are written upward. X is expressed by putting a slight backward slant on the S symbol, though a word beginning X is just written as if spelt is. W, when in the middle of a word, is notated with a short dash under the next vowel. Therefore, the letter Q is usually written as K with a dash underneath the next vowel. In anniversary and before, if Z need be distinguished from S, a small tick drawn at a right angle from the S may be written to make this distinction. Many of the letters shown are also brief forms, or standard abbreviations for the most common words for increased speed in writing. For instance, instead of writing can for can, the Gregg stenographer just writes K. These brief forms are shown on the image to the right. There are several others not shown, however. For instance, please is written in simplified and back as simply PL, and govern as GV. Phrasing is another mechanism for increasing the speed of shorthand writing. Based on the notion that lifting the pen between words would have a heavy speed cost, phrasing is the combination of several smaller distinct forms into one outline. For example, it may be that there can be written in one outline, tm, ab, th, a, th. I have not been able would be written, AVNBA. The vowels in Gregg's shorthand are divided into three main groups that very rarely require further notation. The A is a large circle, and can stand for the A in apple, father, and ache. The E is a small circle, and can stand for the E in feed and help, the I in trim and marine, and the vowel in her and learn. The A represents the I in fine. The O is a small hook that represents the OWL in talk, the O in cone, jot, and order. The U is a tiny hook that expresses the three vowel sounds heard in the words who, up, and foot. It also expresses AW at the beginning of a word. In anniversary, short and long vowel sounds for E, A, O and U may be distinguished by a mark under the vowel, a dot for short and a small downward tick for long sounds. There are special vowel markings for certain diphthongs. The OW in how is just an A circle followed by a U hook. The IO in lion, or any diphthong involving a long I and a vowel, is written with a small circle inside a large circle. The ear in piano and repudiate is notated as a large circle with a dot in its center. In anniversary and back, if A need be distinguished from ear, it is notated with a small downward tick inside the circle instead of the dot. The U in united is notated with a small circle followed by a new hook above it. Due to the very simple alphabet, Gregg's shorthand is very fast in writing. However, it takes a great deal of practice to master it. Speeds of 280 wpm have been reached with this system before, and those notes are still legible to others who know the system. Some left-handed shorthand writers have found it more comfortable to write Gregg's shorthand from right to left. This mirror writing was practiced by a few people throughout the life of Gregg's shorthand. However, left-handed writers can still write Gregg's shorthand from left to right with considerable ease. Versions. Throughout the history of Gregg's shorthand, different forms of Gregg were published. All the versions use the same alphabet and basic principles, but they differ in degree of abbreviation and, as a result, speed. The 1916 version is generally the fastest and most abbreviated version. Series 90 Gregg has the smallest degree of abbreviation, but it is also generally the slowest version of Gregg. Though each version is different in its level of abbreviation, most versions have expert and reporting versions for writers who desire more shortcuts. Pre-anniversary Gregg's shorthand Gregg's shorthand was first published in 1888 by John Robert Gregg himself. However, it was in a very primal stage, and therefore did not gain much success. 5 years later, a much better version was published. This version was published in a second edition in 1893, then a full book in a third edition was entitled Gregg's Shorthand in 1897. The fourth edition in 1902 developed more shortcuts. In 1916, the fifth edition was published, which is what is most often the edition meant by the term pre-anniversary. This version of Gregg's shorthand has the largest number of brief forms, phrases, and shortcuts. Gregg's shorthand anniversary edition In 1929 another version of Gregg's shorthand was published. This system reduced the memory load on its learners by decreasing the number of brief forms and removing uncommon prefixes. It was intended to have been published in 1928 on the 40th anniversary of the system, but it was published a year afterward due to a delay in its production. Gregg's shorthand simplified Gregg's shorthand simplified was published in 1949. This system drastically reduced the number of brief forms that needed to be memorized to only 181. Even with this reduction in the number of brief forms, one could still reach speeds upward of 150 wpm. The system was simplified in order to directly address the need of producing business stenographers who only needed 100 to 120 wpm transcription. The creator of an advanced reporting version of Gregg's shorthand, Charles Lee Swem, wrote in the National Shorthand Reporter, an abbreviated, simplified edition of our system has been published and accepted for the purpose of training office stenographers, and not necessarily reporters. He also advised, I do not believe any young student should hesitate to study simplified for fear it will jeopardize his chances of becoming a reporter. It is fundamentally the same system as we reporters learn from the anniversary edition. Once simplified is learned, the changeover to the reporting style is comparatively simple and can be made by any writer. Gregg Shorthand Diamond Jubilee Edition The Diamond Jubilee series was published through most of the 60s and the 70s. It was simpler than the simplified version, and reduced the number of brief forms to 129. For Diamond Jubilee students who want to increase speed for reporting, an edition of Expert Diamond Jubilee was available to push speeds upward. Gregg Shorthand Series 90 Series 90 was an even simpler version, which used a minimal number of brief forms and placed a great emphasis on clear transcription, rather than reporting speed. Although it introduced a couple of new abbreviations and reintroduced some short forms that were missing in Diamond Jubilee, it eliminated several other short forms, and was in the main simpler, longer, and slower than the previous editions. Shorthand was dwindling in popularity during the series' usage. Gregg Shorthand Centennial Edition Published in 1988, this is the most recent series of Gregg Shorthand. It was the only version since the pre-anniversary edition of 1916 to increase the complexity of the system from the previous one, having 132 brief forms. Adaptations Gregg Shorthand has been adapted to several languages, including Afrikaans, Esperanto, French, German, Hebrew, Irish, Italian, Japanese, Polish, Portuguese, Russian, Spanish, Catalan, Thai and Tagalog. With a few customizations, it can be adapted to nearly any language. The Spanish version, whose designer was Eduardo Vega, is the most popular adaptation. The Mandarin Chinese version slightly modified the original system, under the name Bifang Suji, Northern Shorthand. See also, Court Reporter, Pitman Shorthand, Snemask, Stenotype, Transcript. Footnotes, Gregg, John Robert. Basic Principles of Gregg Shorthand. New York, Gregg Publishing. Pages 5. History of the Major System, the Anti-Absurd or Phrenotypic English Pronouncing and Orthographical Dictionary by Major Beniowski. The Mnemonic Major System and Gregg Shorthand have the same underlying structure. Gregg, John Robert. Gregg's Shorthand, A Light Line Phenography for the Million. Boston, John Robert Gregg. Gregg, John Robert. Gregg's Shorthand, A Light Line Phenography for the Million. New York, Gregg Publishing Company. Gregg, John Robert. Gregg's Shorthand, A Light Line Phenography for the Million. New York, Gregg Publishing. Gregg, John Robert. Gregg's Shorthand, A Light Line Phenography for the Million. New York, Gregg Publishing. Gregg, John Robert. Gregg's Shorthand Manual Simplified. New York, McGraw-Hill. ISBN 0-07-024548-7. Gregg, John Robert. Gregg's Shorthand. New York, Gregg Division, McGraw-Hill. ISBN 0-07-024625-4. Gregg, John Robert. Series 90. New York, Gregg Division McGraw-Hill. ISBN 0-07-024471-5. Gregg, John Robert. Gregg's Shorthand for Colleges. New York, McGraw-Hill. ISBN 0-07-037401-5. Leslie, Louis. Gregg Nothand. New York, Gregg Division, McGraw-Hill. ISBN 0-07-037331-0. Gregg, Basic Principles, 2. Pitman, Isaac. Course in Isaac Pitman Shorthand. New York, Isaac Pitman and Sons. Pages 6. ABCDE Gregg, 1929 Manual, 1. Cowan, Leslie. John Robert Gregg, A Biography. Oxford, The Pre-Raphaelite Press. Pages 18. ISBN 0-947635-00-9. A. B. Gregg, Basic Principles, 16. Sloan, John M. The Duployen Phonographic Instructor, an improved adaptation to the English of the Duployen French method. Dublin, W. Leckay and Company pages 11. A. B. Gregg, 1929 Manual, 18. Gregg, 1929 Manual, 29. A. B. Gregg, 1929 Manual, 53. Gregg, 1929 Manual, 23. Gregg, 1929 Manual, 10. Gregg, 1929 Manual, 66. Gregg, 1929 Manual, 50. Gregg, 1929 Manual, 15. Gregg, 1929 Manual, 86. A. B. Gregg, 1929 Manual, 3. A. B. C. Gregg, 1929 Manual, 61. Gregg, 1929 Manual, 34. Gregg, 1929 Manual, 48. Gregg, 1929 Manual, 52. Gregg, 1929 Manual, 4. A. B. C. Gregg, 1929 Manual, 65. Gregg, 1929 Manual, VX. Leslie, Louis. Methods of Teaching Gregg Shorthand. New York, McGraw-Hill pages 128 to 129. ISBN 0-07-037254-3. Swem, Charles Lee, Why Gregg Simplified. The National Shorthand Reporter, 14, 9, 385. Jackson, Ernest L. Gregg Shorthand Adapted to Esperanto. New York, Gregg Publishing. Senecal, R. J. Starr Copyright Stenography Gregg. New York, Gregg. Greenberg, Samuel Valencia. Gregg Shorthand Adapted to the German Language. New York, Gregg. Widzowski, Jakub Zef. Stenografia Polska. New York, Gregg. Harter, Eugenio Claudio. Stenographia Gregg. New York, Gregg. Gregg, John Robert. Taquigrapher Gregg. New York, Gregg. Further reading, Hollier, Dennis. How to Write 225 Words per Minute with a Pen. The Atlantic. Archived from the original on March 11, 2015. Reporter offers a lesson in the lost technology of shorthand. External links, greg.angelfishy.net, dedicated to Gregg Shorthand's perpetuation, Internet Archive's public domain Gregg Shorthand novels and manuals.